Ari Bramwood's here with my dear friend, Liad Brody. And it's my favorite segment called Better Know a Jew. And for those that have tuned into this segment before they know why, it's because I've always been like a show and tell type of guy. And the best kept secret of Judea is the Jews of Judea. And you are one of those incredible diamonds. You're a diamond of a Jew. Every time I'm around you, I feel closer to Hashem. I leave inspired. And I thought that this was a perfect week to introduce you to our friends and brothers in the fellowship. I was just telling you about the fellowship. Hundreds of people in 40 countries around the world that are just so thirsty to connect with Israel, the Torah of Israel, the nation of Israel, the God of Israel. And that's what it's about. So I wanted to introduce them to you. And I was thinking, of course, there was another Torah portion I thought that you would tie in very well to. But this one is beautiful as well, because the minute I started reading through it, and it was about vows and annulling vows, and just in general, the power of a vow, of a neder in Hebrew, I thought to invite you. Now, why would I invite you to...
Well, first of all, I got to say, it's a privilege to be here.
Thank you.
And I feel the same way. Anytime I'm around you, I feel closer to Hashem. So, Chasdei Hashem, we're very blessed. I know the other portion you're talking about is probably Parshas Naso. And most of the time I get a text message like, oh, it's your Parsha. And the reason is because I was a Nazarite, a Nazir in Hebrew for over 7 years. Concluded recently on Lag BaOmer. And so, yeah, even to this day, even though I'm no longer in that status, people still know me as a Nazir. Just because of that, most people have only ever known me as that. My wife included.
I've known you for years, and only recently have you returned to the fold of the rest of humanity.
Yeah,
yes.
Right, trying to become a human again.
So what was that like? Why did you take on that vow?
Well,
what was that like? Give us your thought process. Just briefly, you were born in South Africa.
Correct. Born in South Africa, lived there until I was about 11. Spent the next about 11 years in California. And then I went off, spent a year in Asia. It was a wild time. And it was actually in Asia that I became a Nazarite. It was right after Pesach time. On the conclusion of Pesach it's known as the Shvi Shel Pesach, and it concludes with
seventh day of Passover.
Passover, right. And there's a little bit of a celebration, a feast at the conclusion. Some call it Mamuna, others call it the Seudah of Mashiach, the feast of Messiah. And it was actually on that day that I ended up taking on the vow. I think one of the simple reasons I took it on is like you, and I think this is why we connect so much, is we're a bit extremist in a certain sense. I mean, if you look at where Ari is right now, where we are right now, you understand there's a positive, we just saw it in Parshas Pinchas, that to be zealous for Hashem, to be zealous for holiness, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's why me and you connect, and our friend circle, we connect. And I've always...
It manifests itself in different ways.
Right, absolutely. And I strongly felt that it's an injustice, it's a sadness in the world that the creator of the world, where there is nothing outside of him, doesn't have a home in his own world. And how can I allow myself to be comfortable, to be too comfortable, so long as he doesn't have a home? I don't want to be, so to speak,
well, isn't that what we're trying to do with our prayers and our national aspiration for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple, to create a dwelling place, a home for God in the world? Isn't that what our aspiration should be? Why did you decide to make it on such a personal, biblical, Nazarite, out-of-the-box way? I mean, most people don't know any other Nazarites. I didn't, other than you.
Right. I think an added element is you can't really maybe give a good reason behind these things. I know I'm married to a woman who's a convert, although it's a story for another time, that she does have family lineage that connected to Judaism. So when you ask most converts, at least when I've asked them why they did it, it's something deep and innate inside of them that they can't really describe. They just know that this is who they are, and they could give reasons, but the reasons are never good enough. I can't tell you I can give you reasons, but even to myself, the reasons aren't good enough. The most deep and innate reason is I just felt this is what I need to do. This is one of what we would call, with regard to Kabbalah, a tikkun. This is a rectification that we as a klal, as a general, all-encompassing soul of Israel need. And sometimes a certain individual might do so for the collective. And even after now I've concluded, I've had rabbis come up to me and say, thank you in a sense for your service, like we would say to a soldier. Because they understand that the Torah is eternal. That means that the portions of the Torah that describe the Nazarite and speak about the commandments relating to the Nazarite, they haven't gone out of effect just because we don't have a temple anymore. There's still a belief and there's still an idea of it. And this is something that I can't describe. I just knew this is something I needed to do.
So what does that entail, right? You took on this Nazarite and you took it on indefinitely? This was the vow you took indefinitely? Or I remember there being something else there.
Correct. There was something else. I originally took it on with the mindset that I would be concluding it when Messiah came, because when Messiah came, there would be a temple. And when there's going to be a temple, and I still...
That was your stated intention?
That was my intention, correct. That
Okay.
when Messiah comes...
You understood when this happened, the gravity of the vow?
Probably not, to be honest. But I mean, I was still gung-ho about it. I was all in. And then as years went by, there was an opportunity. You were at my wedding. You actually were the pillar at my wedding, holding down, and it was a windy day. You had to hold a real. You had to. That's why I picked you, because I know you're a strong guy. You can handle it. But right before we got married, many of the rabbis of my wife and of myself, what they said, we've got about 10 rabbis here. Like, we can organize a beis din, which would be a court, a religious holy court, that anything that is cemented here below is cemented up above in the heavens, and we can find a way to get you out of this vow, to annul the vow. And I'd spoken to my wife before, she would be my future wife at the time, and I said to her, listen, this isn't about me anymore. This decision no longer just affects me, it affects you. The moment we're united, we become one. Now, I'll tell you that I believe in the words of the tzaddikim. I believe in the words of Rav Kook. I believe in the words of Rabbi Nachman, the Rebbe of Lubavitch, all these great, great men that have said very clearly that we're in, if not the beginning of Messiah, we're straight up in the times of Messiah already. And therefore, I don't, a lot of times I meet people and they say to me, oh, so you're going to be a Nazarite forever until you die. And I say, God forbid, what are you talking about? I don't know where your mind is even coming. No, this is until like tomorrow. That's the way I see it. Because the temple is right here. Any second now I'm going to see it. And I'm going to conclude it then. So I understand if this is a heavy thing, I said to my wife, to take on, and we can find a way out of it, and it'll work out. It's no problem. But if you like me, or as an extremist, and you believe in the words of the tzaddikim, the righteous, that say that we're in that time, then it's not forever. And maybe,
how did she respond to that?
She said 100%. I'm with you. I agree. We're going to see.
And
Messiah.
you had been dating for a while, so she knew what that entailed. Now tell our viewers out there, our listeners, what does that entail to actually be a Nazarite? We've heard of Samson,
correct?
Right? We've heard of, but to actually do it, I remember you describing it once. It was like a whole back world that you never pictured to be the story. It's even interesting to see you so clean cut and under control and sharp looking, because it wasn't like that for a while. So
I was an untamed beast, if you will. So there's 10 commandments, according to the Rambam Maimonides, that are associated with the Nazarite. The truth is, I can break them down into 3 categories, and the 10 commandments, as we'll see, are all fitting into those 3 categories. First, the Nazarite is not allowed to cut his hair. That means I can't brush my hair, because as a Jew with curly hair, chances are you're going to pull out a hair. I have to be careful. If I pulled out a single hair, I would be doing a sin against God and against the Torah of God. So that's one category. Not letting your hair grow, that's a commandment, and not cutting your hair, that's a commandment as well. The next category is with regards to the fruit of the vine, what we would call grapevine. And that means that I cannot partake of anything associated with the grapevine. Not even the leaves, not even a raisin, not even balsamic vinaigrette that's made out of the same products, which has been a difficulty throughout the years because a lot of times we know meat is made with wine or salad dressing is with vinaigrette. So thank God my wife has always been on top of it, and she saved me many times because unknowingly, something was in there. So that's another whole category. So it breaks up in many ways: the grape, the raisin, the leaf, all these different things. So that's category 2. Category 3 is I could not, I should say, allow myself to take on the impurity that comes with contact with death. So it's even more severe than the Cohen, than the priest, even more in a sense than the high priest is for the Nazarite. The Nazarite is called, in the words of the Torah, kadosh, holy to God. And so is the priest, is called holy to God. But it's even more so because a priest is allowed to get impurity by contact, by going to, for example, bury a close relative. A Nazarite, even for a close relative.
Even for a close relative.
Even if, God forbid, my parents, God forbid, my brothers, God forbid, my wife were to pass away, I would not be allowed to become impure. Whereas a priest would be able to.
But did you feel a closeness because of these constraints? Did you feel a closeness to God? Did it amplify a level of spirituality?
It's a great question. On the one hand, a closeness to God, and on the other hand, a foreignness from people. I felt, and in some sense I still feel it through me, a bit of an alienness, a bit of it being an outsider. Because when it comes to a catastrophe, God forbid, when someone dies, God forbid, it's natural, human instinct to feel like there's something wrong here, to feel pain on the human level. And being as I was, by law, having to set a boundary and be separate from that human element of the mourning process and everything, I've always been strongly in Hashem's corner, as opposed to maybe in the human corner of, no, this is pain, this is hard, where's the goodness in this? Mm-hmm. And so that I found really...
was a product, you've always been there, or this was amplified by the Nazarite vow that you took?
Correct, amplified by the Nazarite vow. And I found that since I've concluded my vow, it's interesting to see interpersonal relationships, how they've changed. There have been people that, for years, kept a distance from me for whatever reason. Obviously, the way I looked was, you could
describe how you looked differently. I remember you used to wear this very sort of Rastafarian head net that looked very packed.
It was packed. And
could you describe what was going on under there?
I could. So, I mean, when I first started my vow, before I was married, I would wear, you didn't have a kippah, a yarmulke or a head covering that necessarily covered the amount of my head that I would like, because the amount of hair I had was just so immense. So I wore a beanie as my kippah, essentially, as my head covering. And before I got married, I allowed myself to let my hair out, at least to the sides. Once I got married, I changed that, and I started covering all the time my entire hair. And being that I have curly hair, when you put it up in that configuration, it was inevitable that you would get dreadlocks in your hair. So it turned into a giant dreadlock, if you will, my entire head. And eventually, typical beanies wouldn't do the job. So I had to turn to my brothers and sisters in Jamaica, because they were the closest to deal. They had a situation that was similar, that they could deal with it. So I had bigger and bigger beanies that would cover the whole head. And it was really, it weighed a few pounds easily. And it was large. I guess you might be able to describe it even better. I don't know.
Okay, and so your family, what did they think? I met your dad. He's like a pretty normal type of guy.
Right. I mean, they still think I'm crazy.
Right.
But I mean, it's funny because recently we did a little exercise where we went around the table and we said, describe everyone in just one word. And the word that, that seemed to keep coming up were words that were, pious, words along that nature, words about someone who just is devout and taking things to another level when it comes to his obligations as a Jew.
Right. Are there other Nazarites in Israel?
There are other Nazarites, and there have been historically, even in recent times, very well-known Nazarites. I've met, people, religious people that are learned people that are like, as soon as they find out I'm a Nazarite or see it, they're like, oh, there's no such thing, and it's quite absurd, and it's quite a surprise to me every time I hear that, because we know that, for example, in recent times, the main student of Rav Kook was known as Rav Nazir. He was the Nazarite rabbi,
Right.
and he was even more extreme than I was, in the sense that he took on vows beyond what just a Nazarite vow was. He vowed never to speak in a language other than Hebrew, never to leave the land of Israel, never, many vows on top of that. There's those that say, and it seems to be a well-known, accepted fact, that the Rogachover go on, the genius of Rogachover, who according to many opinions, gave smicha, rabbinical ordination to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he himself was also a Nazarite. And if you look at pictures, you see his immense hair. So in recent times, we've had really big individuals that were Nazarites. And even to this day, there are, I personally didn't like getting too much attention. So it's not like I would parade around and announce it. On the contrary, actually, it was between me and God. And
I imagine a lot of table conversations, it just became about, it's like we have that mutual friend, I don't know, Akiva, he's a raw food vegan. Every table conversation becomes the fact he's a raw food vegan. I imagine all the more so for you. It may be against your will.
Absolutely. It became my identity in a big sense. Who I was, which is, when I concluded my vow, it really, in a sense, felt like a death of an individual, because it was something that for 7+ years was one with me.
And so could you tell us about that? How did you conclude that vow? What inspired the conclusion? What changed things?
Okay, so over the years, a lot of times when I've met religious individuals and they found out that I was a Nazarite, one of the typical reactions I got is, "Oh, so you're a sinner," which is very, low way of looking at things. But the truth is that it's correct. According to the Torah, to conclude the Nazarite vow, you would have to bring a sin offering. And it's debated amongst the sages, why do they have to bring a sin offering? One of the understandings is that you've cut yourself off from the world, a world which God, like you said, wants us to be a part of, wants to elevate. And by making extra limitations on yourself, you've kind of gone away from God's will in a way. At the same time, there's Nachmanides Ramban, who says actually the reason that a Nazarite needs to bring a sin offering is because he was on a high level of spirituality and he allowed himself to conclude that vow and therefore come to a lower level of spirituality. That was the sin. So I had people that were always against it, always felt that most people, if not 99.9%, we said that there was a few big holy individuals that were Nazarite, but the majority of us shouldn't even think about vows. Vows are very serious, and I do need to put that disclaimer out there that, like, even if you think this is cool, be very careful.
People are, the sages say, any rabbi you really go to today will say, just don't make the vow.
Correct.
Just don't make it. The gravity, we don't even understand the gravity well enough nowadays to know the power of the vow. So don't even go there.
Absolutely. It's a very typical thing, especially in Israel, but amongst most Jews, to say, oh, I'll see you tomorrow, bli neder. Without the force of a vow, because we know just how strong our words are.
Even if you don't make a vow, just the power of words without that is close enough that you want to say without any vow, just in case there's any confusion here.
Absolutely. So after years went by, and I'm pretty secure in my own shoes. I'm not really following the pack type individual. But once I got a little bit, okay, many rabbis are coming up to me, they're against this. I figured, you know what, let's just go to one of the top, and let's hear what the top rabbi says. It's the first time I consulted a dayan or a posek, a rabbinical authority on Jewish law. And so I decided if I'm going to go, I better go to the top of the top. And I went to one of the most well-known, most respected rabbis in Israel. Rav Kanievsky, Rav Chaim Kanievsky in Bnei Brak. And it's kind of crazy. The first time I ever went to him wasn't related to the vow. Like I said, I was pretty secure in who I was, even with all the heat I got outside. And I remember I came there for a blessing, actually. And I got brought into the room, and he was sitting at the head of the table with his head down, facing the opposite corner of the room. So he hadn't seen me. I came in the other side. I saw the whole time my eyes were fixed on him. He hadn't seen me yet. He hadn't heard of me yet. He knew nothing about me yet. And his attendant told me to come and stand to the side. And again, I'm standing there. I'm watching him. He hasn't seen me. He hasn't heard from me. So the attendant goes in his ear and he says, hey, there's this Jew here and he wants a blessing for this and this and this. And I was floored by the response. Rav Kanievsky, I heard him say, and on what does this Jew do Kiddush and Havdalah? Kiddush is when we bless.
When we sanctify the Sabbath going into the Sabbath, and Havdalah, making the distinction between the Sabbath and the weekday. And that's both of them are done on wine or grape juice.
Correct. So it would be a stupid question if you know that you got a Jew there, because 99.9% of Jews probably do it on wine or grape juice. It's only not a stupid question if somehow this is the 0.001% that doesn't do it that way.
And he didn't know that you were a Nazir?
He did not know I was a Nazarite. He hadn't looked at me yet. And after saying that, he turned and looked at me and just let a big smile out. And I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. So I responded to him, that I do it on different types of wine. So pomegranate wine.
Port.
Right, sometimes beer or whatever. I found ways around it for a while. I used to do Kiddush on whiskey. It made my table way more tolerable. No, I'm just kidding. I think once you came to me for a Shabbos, I probably did it on a whiskey or something like that.
It could be. Yeah.
So that was the first time I went to him. The second time I went to him was specifically for the vow. And he responded and he said to me, no, it's all good. You can continue with your vow. He said, but be careful. Be careful about going outside the land of Israel. Because there is a concept that's discussed in Jewish law in the Gemara and Talmud about the way that non-Jews aren't as particular about the burial of the dead, where they bury the dead, and therefore there's an overall doubt as to whether you could be stepping on areas that might have deceased individuals below, corpses below. And so that was his instruction to me. Okay, after that, anytime a rabbi or someone came and they gave me a hard time, I said, listen, I've spoken to Rav Kanievsky, and you saw their face immediately. Okay, what do I know? Which was nice. It was nice to get that freedom. Okay, let's fast forward. About 6 months ago, I told you that before me and my wife got married, many rabbis obviously were against it, and they said this is the time to annul it. There's a special way nowadays that we would annul it. I don't know that we touched on this, but the way that the vow concludes, according to the Torah, the Bible, is that you would go to the temple, you would bring your sin offering, you would then cut your hair, you would be able to have wine, and you would be done. But it was a very particular procedure. Now that we don't have a temple yet, we know it's going to be here any second, but now that we don't have one yet, how does one conclude a vow? The truth is that according to the Rambam, which we mentioned before, he's in a limbo state. He's stuck in this place. Now, with any vow, regardless of the type of vow, there's always the possibility, which we've kind of touched on, to go to a based-in authority in Jewish law, a certain collection, a group, that are able to find a way, a loophole, if you will, in which you learn something new that, had you known originally at the time when you took on the vow, would have maybe inundated and maybe made you not take on the vow. So there are ways where you can get out of vow, and that's so. This one of the rabbis that was a rabbi of my wife, and he's a Rosh Yeshiva here in Jerusalem, a very respected individual. He followed up with us about 6 months ago, and he said, listen, I still think that this vow isn't so good. And I think you should go and consult Rav Kanievsky again. Now, we're in Corona times. And Corona times, it's very hard, especially the man's in his 90s already, almost in mid-90s. So you can imagine that you have to be very careful. So I didn't think it was feasible to go and see him. I tried to reach out to his attendant to have an audience with him, but it wasn't happening. And eventually I just said, fine, will you ask the question for me? And I asked him very simply, do you still hold that this vow is good for me, that I should proceed with the vow? And months go by, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm sending the message again, and he's seeing it, and he's like, I'll ask him today again, I'll ask him, and I'm not getting a response, and I'm like, what's going on here? And it really, all of a sudden, something shifted in my own heart, and I started wondering, like, maybe, this is 7 years in the game, like, maybe I've done my service to Hashem. 7 has this connotation in Kabbalah of completion.
Yeah.
And maybe there is something to this. Maybe that this big rabbi is feeling very strongly that this is coming from God himself, that it's in the heart of this rabbi. And I started doing what we call hitbodedut, trying to talk to God in my own way to try and get clarity. Now, it was the week before Lag BaOmer. Maybe you want to tell a bit about what Lag BaOmer is or something?
No, it's okay.
Okay,
we'll talk about that on another show.
So it was the week before Lag BaOmer. My brother had just got engaged, and this was his last Shabbos as a single man, you could say. And
Lo Shav.
And it was his last Shabbos as a single man, and we had a lot of guests to come over to wish congratulations, Mazal Tov. And all of a sudden, my wife looks at me. And again, it's right at this time where I'm trying to get clarity. What does Hashem want from me? I need an answer. I need something. And my wife looks at me and she says, Liad, there's something wrong with your forehead. And I go and look in the mirror, and right where my hairline is, you could see that it's starting to protrude, like a horn is growing, it seems, literally out of my forehead, right by the hairline. And it's causing that the whole forehead is now swollen. And I completely look disfigured in a way.
Wow.
And the people that are there are really concerned, and they're saying, you're probably going to need a surgery. That looks bad right after Shabbos ends. You should take care of that. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And at first I'm like, wow, I must have done something wrong. God's obviously punishing me. I need to do a cheshbon. I need to look into my conduct, see if there's something off. And then suddenly it dawns on me. No, you've asked for clarity. Hashem's giving you clarity. Why? Well, we went over one of the laws, that the commandments that a Nazarite can overstep is even cutting a single hair. Even if another Jew were to cut my hair. With the case of Delilah and Samson, we saw this, but that would be a huge sin on that Jew's part. So in order to do the surgery that everyone was saying I was going to need to do, they would have had to shave or cut part of my hair because it was so close to the hairline, and inevitably it became a huge halachic, a Jewish law issue. And so I said, this may be Hashem, the Creator, giving me my answer. It's a blessing in disguise. Saying as if, the way I took it, that you've done your service, and I want you to know we're thankful for that, but the time is up. This isn't anymore what is needed of you for the people as a whole. Still, I worried about it, and I wasn't sure about it, and so I held off. And days went by, and I went to consult a doctor, and the doctor said, absolutely, you're going to need a surgery. I said, okay, so be it. But either way, the surgery was for a while, and I wasn't going to act too quickly. Now, a week later, it's about to be my brother's wedding. It's a few hours before. And finally, I get a response out of the blue, months later, from Rav Kanievsky. And he says, it is no longer good for you to continue to be a Nazarite. Find the nearest rabbinical court and see if they can find a way to annul it according to Jewish law.
Well, I'm getting goosebumps. I mean, it's so rare to have that type of divine communication. So coordinated. I mean, go ahead. So what was that like?
It
was a confirmation.
So not only that, when I first took on my vow, I was actually in Vietnam, and it's fun, a side story, but I met my wife in Vietnam only many years later when we get married. I had no idea she was my wife at the time. She knew right away that I was her soulmate. But my wife in numerology, her name is Dina, which is in numerology, yain, wine. So that was always like spooky because it actually happened to be right after I met her, I took on the vow without knowing. And so there's something there. But the rabbi at the time who was in Vietnam, he's still there, he always joked that, you know what, Liad over here didn't grow up religious, so he didn't have the privilege at the third year of his life to have a special haircut that's part of the Jewish tradition. So one day on Lag BaOmer is usually the time they like to do this. One day he'll have his haircut on Lag BaOmer and he'll kind of... Right. So all of a sudden that I got this response right at Lag BaOmer, it reminded me of what this rabbi said too, which I was like also like, wow, that's crazy. And immediately I look up, and who's there is the rabbi who's going to conduct the wedding is the chief rabbi of Netanya. So I go up to him and I show him the response from Rav Kanievsky, and he's also like flabbergasted. And he's just like, absolutely. We're going to do this tomorrow. And the next day he takes me to his rabbi, and all of a sudden I'm sitting with a table of top rabbis, and they're grilling me. They're grilling me to find a way to get me out of an annulment of the vow. And inevitably, they are able to do that, and I'm able to get free. Story gets even more interesting because now I eventually go to get the surgery on this area, and out of nowhere they say it's
unnecessary.
Disappeared. It's disappeared.
Of course.
Come on, that's pretty crazy, right? So I feel very honored and blessed that I was able to serve the Creator and the Jewish people in this way, and it's a humbling thing. And at the same time, you know, I recognize